I sat there watching him, my own flesh and blood, treat my home like it was his, like everything I worked for was his birthright. He never asked, never thought twice. Just took. Have you ever had someone you loved turn their back on you for their own gain? Tell me your story. The house on the mountain had always been a sanctuary. I sat in the living room, the cold light of the late afternoon filtering through the windows. I couldn't help but feel the weight of the years pressing down on me. I'd built this house with my own hands, and yet it had become a prison, a reminder of everything I'd lost. A faint noise from outside broke my train of thought. Thomas was there, his car parked at the foot of the driveway. He was pacing back and forth, a phone pressed to his ear, the kind of busy businessman. He had come here without warning again, but this time it was different. Thomas had organized a business meeting in my house, without asking, without a single word of permission. He'd done this before, using the property as though it were his own, but something about today felt different. My hand tightened on the window frame, the familiar sense of frustration rising within me. I wasn't sure what made me stay silent this time. Maybe it was the growing realization that I had let him take too much for too long. Maybe it was the bitter sting of betrayal, the subtle shifting of power that I had failed to notice until it was too late. But there I stood watching as he moved about my home, as if it were his, the guests following his lead, laughing, discussing deals in my living room. A few hours later, after the meeting ended, I watched Thomas in the kitchen casually pouring himself a drink, as if he owned the place. He turned to me with a half smile, unbothered by the tension thickening the air between us. "You know," he said, holding up his glass, "this place could really work better for me if you just handed over the deed. I could make it work, you know. You've done enough with it." I said nothing. The words hung in the air like a bitter aftertaste. I had heard them before, in different words, in different moments. The entitlement, the belief that everything I had worked for was his to take. I stood there watching him, the weight of years of silence settling in my chest. "You don't have to do this, Uncle," Thomas continued, his voice, lowering just enough to sound almost like concern. "It's time to let go." The news about Thomas's little business meeting spread like wildfire. Within a few days, whispers were circulating not just among family members, but within the business circles I had once been a respected part of. People who had always shown me respect began to look at me with thinly veiled doubt. They questioned my ability to manage my own affairs. Thomas, on the other hand, was suddenly the talk of the town. The attention he was getting from new people I'd never seen before, was unsettling. His reputation was growing, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me. It wasn't just the house anymore. It wasn't just about business. It was everything: my name, my years of work, the very fabric of my relationships being slowly unraveled in the public eye. The inner conflict was tearing at me. I sat at my desk one evening staring at the phone in front of me, wondering if I should make a call. Maybe to a lawyer. Maybe to one of the few friends who hadn't yet turned their backs. I didn't know what to do, but the longer I sat in silence, the more it gnawed at me. Then the community pressure started to build. People who once admired me began to turn away their eyes, glancing at me with judgment. They didn't understand what was happening, but they sure had an opinion on it. I had let Thomas take the reins, let him walk all over me, and now the gossip was spilling over into my everyday life. One afternoon, I walked into my favorite cafe, and the moment I stepped inside, I felt it: the weight of the stairs. The woman behind the counter, who used to greet me with a smile, now barely acknowledged my presence. I could hear the low murmur of voices behind me, barely audible, but the sharp edge of their whispers was unmistakable. I didn't need to ask what they were talking about. Thomas's business dealings were on everyone's lips. My inability to stop it, to stand up for myself, had become the latest topic of discussion. My phone buzzed on the table, breaking my thoughts. It was Sarah. "Michael, we need to talk." "I'm coming over," she texted. I knew what that meant. Sarah didn't come over unless it was serious. She had been my closest friend for years, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who didn't hesitate to tell me when I was being a fool. I couldn't avoid this conversation, not any longer. An hour later, she walked through the door, her usual brisk pace slowing down when she saw my face. She took a seat across from me, her gaze steady, reading me as she always did. "You're letting this go too far," she said, without any preamble. "I don't know what you mean," I muttered, though I knew exactly what she meant. The truth was, I was torn between feeling like I had to defend myself and feeling like the more I pushed back, the more the people I cared about would be pushed away. "Don't give me that. You've been silent long enough." "Michael, I get it. You're trying to keep the peace. You don't want to make waves. But this isn't peace. It's submission. And I'm not going to sit by and watch you bury yourself over this." I felt a sharp sting in my chest at her words. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the fact that deep down I knew she was right. I had been silent, yes. But I had also been weak. I had let my pride keep me from standing up for what was mine, and in doing so, I had given Thomas the upper hand. "Do you think it's easy for me?" I asked, my voice low. "I know it's not easy," she said, her tone softening. "But you're not just letting him walk over you. You're letting him walk over everything you've worked for. All the years you spent building your life, building your business, your name. You can't let him take that from you. It's time to draw a line." I stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her words settling on me like a heavy coat. She was right. I had been letting him take more than just property. He was taking my reputation, my sense of self, my dignity. "What do I do, Sarah?" The question hung in the air, desperate and raw. She leaned forward, her eyes steady. "You take back control. And if that means confronting him, then you do it. It's time for you to stop playing the victim. You're better than this." Rumors spread faster than I could control them. The first one was subtle, just a whisper in passing, but it didn't take long before it became the kind of story that everyone in the business world knew. It was said that Thomas had been using my name to attract investors for questionable ventures. What started as a casual comment here and there turned into full-blown speculation. At first, I didn't want to believe it. After all, Thomas was my flesh and blood. But when more pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, connections he made under the guise of being my business partner, decisions being made without my knowledge, it was hard to ignore. The way he was leveraging my reputation felt like a direct betrayal. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. His actions weren't just disrespectful, they were manipulative. But then the doubts crept in. Could I have been wrong? Was I misjudging him? It wasn't the first time he'd crossed a line, but this felt different. I had spent my life working for everything I had, but had I been so focused on that work that I missed the signs? When had I allowed myself to become so blind, I sat in my study reviewing old files. The weight of years of decisions, both good and bad, weighed on me. I thought about the advice Sarah had given me just a few days ago. Had I really been the one to make the wrong call? Was I in the wrong for wanting to protect what I had worked so hard to build? The guilt of doubting myself only made the anger fester. The more I questioned my own judgment, the more the feeling of powerlessness settled in. As the days passed, it became impossible to ignore the shift in how people treated me. Now they didn't look me in the eye. It wasn't just Thomas causing the damage. My inaction was doing just as much. The longer I stayed silent, the more people assumed I didn't care that I was letting my own family destroy my legacy. Thomas wasn't just manipulating me anymore. He was controlling the narrative. He had already begun isolating me. No more invitations to family meetings. No more updates on decisions that affected me directly. He kept me out of the loop on everything, making sure I had no access to the information that could help me protect myself or my assets. Every time I tried to get involved, the door was closed. He had taken full control of the family's business operations, pushing me further into the background. I was starting to feel like a ghost in my own life, and the isolation felt suffocating. I couldn't stay silent anymore. But what could I do? The longer I waited, the harder it would be to regain any control. That's when I decided to act, but not in the way I had expected. Instead of confronting him directly, I chose to gather evidence. Every conversation I had with him, I recorded. Every email, every text, I kept them all. I wasn't going to confront him blindly. I would have the proof. One evening, after Thomas had left for yet another one of his meetings, I went through his things. I knew I was crossing a line, but the feeling of being backed into a corner, of being played like a fool for so long, made it feel justified. I found a folder with documents that had my name on them. The contracts were already signed by him, not me. His signature was all over deals that I had no knowledge of, no approval of. It was all right there in black and white. I took a deep breath, standing over the papers. I didn't know how to feel in that moment. Anger. Yes, but it was colder now. A sense of betrayal. Definitely. But there was also something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. A spark of control. I wasn't helpless anymore. I grabbed my phone and sent a single text to Sarah. I'm ready. The meeting was set. A formal family gathering with Thomas, pushing the envelope further than I ever thought he would. There was no subtlety, no pretense anymore. This was it, his move, plain and simple. We sat across from each other at the dining table. Thomas, looking every bit the confident businessman he had become, leaned back in his chair, his eyes locked on mine. He didn't waste time. Michael, he started, his voice smooth but commanding. I think it's clear that this house, this legacy, is something I deserve. You've held on to it long enough. It's time to pass the torch. It's not just for you anymore. It's for the next generation. The words hit harder than I expected. He didn't even flinch as he said it, as if he truly believed that everything I'd worked for was his by some divine right. I stared at him, trying to keep my expression neutral. His words were more than just a request. They were a demand wrapped in a smile, and it sent a wave of anger through me. I took a breath, keeping my hands clasped in front of me. No outburst, no snapback. That's what he wanted. He wanted me to lose control, to make this messy, but I couldn't give him that satisfaction. You're asking for a lot, I replied, my voice steady. This house isn't just a piece of property. It's years of history, my work, my legacy. He raised an eyebrow, leaning in. Your legacy. Come on, Uncle. You've had your time. It's mine now. You've always said this house would go to the next in line. Well, I'm here. It's my turn. I could feel my fists clenching under the table, but I didn't give in to the urge to lash out. Instead, I just nodded, keeping my gaze firm on his. You've made your point, I said, my voice unwavering. But the answer is no. For a moment, the air between us was still, the weight of his words hanging in the room. Thomas didn't flinch. He knew I wasn't going to bend that easily. But he wasn't done yet. That night, after the meeting had ended, I thought the worst was over. But then Thomas took his next step. He'd already set things in motion, as he always did, just out of sight. His lawyer called the next morning. A formal letter arrived shortly after Thomas was challenging my ownership of the house. The letter was filled with legal jargon, most of it foreign to me, but one thing was clear: he was taking this fight to the courts. He didn't just want the house. He was trying to drag my name through the mud, and that I wasn't prepared for. The legal battle was one thing, but the slander that came with it was a different kind of wound. The more I thought about it, the more it stung. He wasn't just trying to steal what was mine. He was attacking everything I had built. The reputation I'd spent decades building was now at risk, all because Thomas thought he could just take what he wanted. And then it spread. Rumors began circulating among my old friends, my business partners, people I had known for years. Thomas had fed them lies, twisted the truth until it was unrecognizable. I heard whispers at meetings, saw the looks exchanged when I walked into a room. The weight of their judgment was suffocating. It wasn't just about the house anymore, it was about me. By the time I realized how deep the damage went, the damage had already been done. My standing in the community was starting to crumble. The people who once respected me now questioned my integrity, and I was being painted as a fool. I knew then that I couldn't remain on the sidelines any longer. This wasn't just about my house, it was about my honor, my pride. And Thomas had taken both without a second thought. But he underestimated me. I knew how to fight back even if I had to play his game. I started to gather everything, every email, every document, every conversation where he had slipped up. I recorded his calls, saved the emails he sent from his side of the business, kept track of his movements. Every little piece of the puzzle I had left. I wasn't going to let him win without a fight. That afternoon, as I sat at my desk reading through yet another one of his deceitful emails, I felt the anger start to shift. It wasn't just fury anymore. It was strategy. And it was about time. Thomas thought he could control everything from behind closed doors, but I was done waiting. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah. No hesitation this time. It's time I said, my voice steady but filled with purpose. Let's do this. She didn't ask questions. She knew what I meant. The call came on a late Tuesday afternoon, a number I didn't recognize, flashing on the screen. It wasn't the kind of call I expected, nothing from a lawyer or an old business associate, but a voice I'd never heard before, deep and cautious. Mr. Harris. The voice began low and deliberate. I have information about your nephew. He's been using your name to cover up some financial activities, and I think you should know. At first I didn't understand. My heart sank into my stomach, and the room seemed to blur around me. The voice continued detailing how Thomas had been siphoning off money, making shady deals under the guise of legitimate business ventures. He was using the very foundation I'd built my name, my reputation, as a tool to pull in investors for schemes that had little to do with the legacy I'd worked so hard to create. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of this new information sinking deep. Thomas had always been ambitious, but I never imagined he'd go so far. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. This was a violation on every level. I felt the anger boiling up again, stronger than before. The call ended abruptly, with the promise that more details would follow. I sat there staring at the phone, the information still processing in my mind. As the evening stretched on, memories began to resurface, moments from the past that I had long buried. I thought about how in the early days I'd taken Thomas under my wing, offering him my support, my advice. He was like a son to me, and I had treated him as such. But had I made a mistake, I remembered the early signs, how little by little he had started to take more and more liberties with what was mine. The first time he'd asked to borrow money for a business deal that seemed too risky, I'd been hesitant, but gave it anyway. The time he'd asked to use the house for a small meeting and then turned it into a full-blown event. He had always managed to play on my sense of family, of duty, until it became second nature to let him take without question. Looking back, I realized I'd let him cross lines because I hadn't wanted to make waves. I'd been so focused on maintaining peace, on not rocking the boat, that I hadn't noticed how much control I was losing. And now everything I had worked for, the very legacy I'd spent my life building, was slipping away into his hands. I couldn't afford to ignore it anymore. The betrayal felt deeper now, more insidious than before. It wasn't just about the house or the business, it was about everything. It was about the trust I had given him, the years of support, only to have it thrown back in my face. I picked up the phone again this time to call Sarah. She picked up after a few rings. "Michael, what's going on?" Her voice was calm, but I could hear the edge of concern in it. "You sound off." "I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I got a call today. Someone tipped me off about Thomas, about what he's been doing with my name, financial stuff. It's bad, Sarah. Really bad." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I knew Sarah was processing the information, weighing the gravity of the situation. Finally, she spoke. "Do you have proof?" Her voice was steady, but her words held a sharpness that told me she wasn't blind to what this meant. "Not yet," I replied, feeling the sting of uncertainty in my own voice. "But it's more than just rumors. He's been using my name to manipulate people to get investors for projects that aren't even legitimate. It's all coming together now." She let out a quiet breath. "We need to act quickly. You can't let this slide, Michael. It's not just a family issue anymore. It's a full-blown power play. This is about control." I sat down heavily, Sarah's words hitting harder than I expected. "I don't know, Sarah. I feel like everything's falling apart. I never thought it would get this far. He's not just taking the business, he's taking everything. My reputation, my name, everything I've worked for." She paused before replying, her voice softer now. "I know you didn't want to believe it, but you've been dealing with this for too long. Now it's time to take action. You've let him walk all over you for far too long, and the worst part is he's done it in a way that's made it look like it's your fault." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of her words settle in. She was right. I had been passive, had let the lines blur between what was mine and what Thomas thought was his. But that ends now. "I'll get the evidence," I said, the decision finally clear in my mind. "I'm not going to just let him destroy everything. Not anymore." "I'll help you," Sarah said, her tone steady but firm. "We'll put a stop to this, Michael. But you need to be ready. This is going to get ugly." The storm of emotions I'd been carrying for weeks started to settle. The anger, the betrayal, the frustration, they were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but they no longer controlled me. I could feel myself slipping back into the mindset I knew well, the one that had served me for so long in the business world, cold, methodical, and sharp. It was time to stop reacting out of emotion and start planning. I spent days reviewing everything I had gathered. Emails, contracts, financial statements, phone records, each piece of evidence felt like a small victory, but they also told a darker story. Thomas had been more deliberate than I gave him credit for. He'd covered his tracks well, but the cracks were starting to show. I called Sarah again, knowing that her support was more crucial now than ever. Her voice, calm and unwavering, was a constant anchor through the chaos. "Are you sure about this?" she asked after hearing the latest update. "It's the only way," I replied. My fingers drummed on the table as I looked at the documents laid out before me. "I can't just let him destroy everything, Sarah. This isn't just about the house anymore. It's about taking back control. You've got the pieces. Now it's time to make them fit." She was right. The strategy needed to be flawless. I was no longer a passive observer in my own life. I needed to fight for what was mine, and I had to do it carefully, strategically. Sarah wasn't just offering legal advice. She was guiding me through the psychological battle as well. For all the legal documents and evidence I had, it was the mental game that could decide everything. I had to stay focused and not let Thomas manipulate me into making a rash move. At her suggestion, I reached out to a trusted lawyer, Mark Davis, who had helped me with contracts in the past. His mind for details and his sharp instinct were exactly what I needed now. He agreed to meet me at my office, a small but reliable space in the city, where I usually kept my professional affairs in order. Mark's expression darkened as he went through the stack of documents I had gathered. He ran his fingers through his hair as he studied a particularly damning piece of evidence. "This is bad, Michael," he said, his voice low. "Thomas has been making moves that could destroy you financially if you let him." "I'm not letting him," I replied firmly. "But I need you to find me a way out." For the next few hours, Mark and I worked together to prepare a defense. He dissected the contracts and the financial statements, pointing out clauses Thomas had tried to manipulate. "This one's a fraud," Mark said, tapping a document. "And this one, it's a conflict of interest. You're going to need to move fast before he locks everything down." The information was a double-edged sword. While it gave me ammunition, it also made me realize the extent of Thomas's deception. This wasn't a simple family disagreement anymore. It was a fight for my reputation, my legacy, and it was about power. Just as Mark was finishing his notes, my phone buzzed again. I saw Thomas's name on the screen. My gut tightened, but I didn't answer. Instead, I dropped the phone face down on the table, deliberately not engaging. "This isn't just business anymore, is it?" Mark said, glancing at me. "It's personal." I nodded. It had always been personal, but now I saw that the game had changed. This wasn't about being a kind uncle anymore, about protecting my family. This was about survival. Over the next few days, I began to feel the weight of what I was doing. The pieces were falling into place, but something didn't feel right. The phone calls were becoming more frequent, and I could tell that Thomas was watching me. I hadn't heard from him directly, but I felt his presence behind the scenes trying to steer the situation in his favor. It wasn't just the business moves. There was something else, something more insidious happening. Then the first warning came. I received an anonymous message late one evening. The text was short and direct. "Stop what you're doing. It won't end well for you." I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. The threat wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Someone had been following my every move. I hadn't shared my plans with anyone except Sarah and Mark, and even then, only in the strictest confidence. The idea that someone knew what I was doing, that Thomas was willing to go to these lengths, made my blood run cold. The next day, I noticed something odd. My computer, which I had left open to some of the documents I was working on, was acting strangely. Files had been moved. Information had been accessed. It was subtle at first, but now it was undeniable. Someone had been tampering with my files, watching me. It was clear that Thomas wasn't just manipulating the business side of things. He was prepared to get dirty. And now I had no choice but to keep going, no matter what it took. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This wasn't just about protecting my house anymore. This was about taking back control of my life. There was no going back. I texted Sarah we move tomorrow. It hit me all at once like a tidal wave crashing down. I woke up to the news that Thomas had gone public with a statement that was as bold as it was dangerous. He had filed a lawsuit, and not just any lawsuit, he was challenging my position in the company I had built from the ground up. The papers were everywhere. The news outlets were quick to pick up on the story. Thomas had painted me as the villain, accusing me of embezzling funds and making shady business moves. Everything he'd been doing behind closed doors, he was now throwing in my face. He called it a family betrayal and claimed that I had lost touch with the company's vision. It was a full-on attack. Not just on my business, but on my name, my reputation, everything I had ever worked for. I had spent years building something that I could be proud of, and now in a matter of days it was crumbling. The legal battle was one thing, losing the company, losing control of the future. I had planned that was another. But what really cut deep was the way he made it seem like I had failed everyone. The people who had once stood by me were now looking at me with suspicion. My closest friends, my business partners, they began to distance themselves. I could feel the weight of their disapproval. In the weeks that followed, I found myself losing ground, not just in the business world, but in my personal life too. I thought I was prepared for a fight, but nothing could prepare me for the silence that greeted me when I walked into rooms where I used to be welcomed with open arms. It was like I had been written out of my own story. I couldn't deny it anymore. The pressure was mounting. It felt like I was being pushed into a corner with nowhere to turn. The calls from the business partners stopped coming. My phone, once buzzing with updates, now sat silent on my desk. Even the staff at the office looked at me differently, as though they too had been swayed by the whispers of Thomas's accusations. But there was no time to wallow in self-pity. Then the final blow came. Thomas wasn't satisfied with just dragging my name through the mud. No, he was playing for keeps. Through his lawyer, he made it clear that if I didn't step down, he would take the fight to the shareholders, to the board, to anyone who would listen. Either you step aside, the letter read, or we'll make sure your reputation is ruined beyond repair. It wasn't just a legal threat anymore. It was personal. He wasn't fighting for the company anymore. He was fighting to erase me from everything I had built, and he was winning. Standing there reading that letter, I realized something. This wasn't just about business or family anymore. It was about control, his control. And I had let him have it. For too long, I had kept my distance, too unsure of myself to make a move. But now I could see clearly. If I didn't fight back, I would lose everything. Not just the company, but my dignity, my pride. I was staring down the barrel of my own destruction, and I couldn't let it happen. But in that moment, a flicker of something inside me sparked a thought I hadn't entertained in weeks. I had the evidence. The documents I had carefully collected, the conversations I had recorded. Thomas had underestimated me. He thought he could control everything, that I would back down. But I wasn't done yet. I took a deep breath, standing there in my office, the letter crumpled in my hand. It felt like I was being suffocated, but I refused to let it consume me. Not like this, I whispered to myself. I wasn't going to lose. Not without a fight. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking but steadying as I dialed Sarah's number. She picked up almost immediately. "Michael," she asked, the concern in her voice unmistakable. "Sarah?" I said, my voice steady now, more certain than I'd felt in weeks. "It's time." There was no hesitation on her end. "You're sure?" "Absolutely." The next few days were a blur of strategy and action. With Sarah's help, we meticulously went over everything again, every piece of evidence, every communication I had with Thomas. We had the documents, we had the proof. It was time to turn the tables. But even as we prepared to act, I knew that Thomas wasn't going to let this go easily. The threats had already started, and I wasn't just worried about the legal ramifications anymore. I was starting to see that he had more than just business at stake. He was desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. That night, I received an anonymous message. It was short, blunt. "We know what you're planning. Don't think you can outsmart him." The message sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. Whoever had sent it knew about my plans. They knew what I was going to do before I even made my move. Thomas wasn't just fighting for control. He was already planning his counterattack. The weeks after the storm had passed were a blur. The battle was over, but the weight of the aftermath was still there, hanging over everything. I had fought for everything I believed in, but I also realized that the real fight had never been about property or money. It was about something deeper, something that I hadn't fully understood until now. I spent a lot of time alone, thinking about everything that had happened. The events with Thomas, the accusations, the betrayal, it had all been a lesson, one that I hadn't wanted to learn, but it had taught me something invaluable. I'd spent so many years focused on building my empire, fighting for control, but somewhere along the way, I had forgotten what truly mattered. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about wealth. It was about freedom, about dignity. And somewhere in the chaos of everything, I had lost sight of that. The decision I made to distance myself from Thomas wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I had ever done. I had spent so much of my life trying to protect him, trying to fix things. But that was the mistake. I had tried to fix someone who didn't want to be fixed. And that was where the true betrayal lay, not in the business deals, not in the house, but in the fact that he had taken everything, not because he needed it, but because he thought he deserved it. Thomas had lost everything. His reputation was in tatters. The people who once followed him now saw him for what he truly was, someone who had manipulated, lied, and used family as a means to an end. His legal troubles were just the beginning. Investigations were underway, and he was being left behind, isolated from those who once supported him. But as much as I wanted to feel vindicated, I didn't. There was no satisfaction in watching him fall. Instead, there was something else, a quiet sense of finality. I had done what I had to do, and now I was free. In the months that followed, I started to rebuild, but not in the way I thought I would. I didn't go back to the corporate world, didn't return to the life I had once known. Instead, I found solace in things I had neglected for far too long. I traveled more, took up hiking, and found peace in the simple act of being outside, away from everything. It wasn't about escaping, no. It was about finding a new sense of purpose. I learned to be at peace with myself, to forgive myself for the mistakes I had made, for the things I had let slide in the name of family. And in doing so, I found a new version of myself, one that was more whole, more content. I didn't need the approval of anyone anymore. The world hadn't ended when I let go. In fact, it felt like it had just begun. I had learned to forgive myself for the things I had failed to see. And with that forgiveness came a kind of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I didn't look back, not really. There was no need. The house, the business, everything was in the past. I had made my peace with it all. When I look at my life now, I realize that everything I thought was important, money, power, control, it was all just a distraction from what really mattered. I had spent so much time chasing something only to find that it wasn't the chase I needed. It was the journey of letting go, of accepting that not everything could be saved. As for Thomas, I never spoke to him again. The legal battles went on, but I was no longer involved. The truth had come out, and that was enough. He had chosen his path, and I had chosen mine. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't feel the need to explain myself or justify my actions. Silence was the strongest message I could send. I found peace in the things that truly mattered. The friendships I had left, the few people who truly understood me, those were the things I held on to. And in the end, those were the things that made me feel whole again. I continued my life not as the man I had been, but as the man I had become. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore, and I was content with that. No regrets, no turning back, just a life finally free.